14 U.S. states vote to choose the Democratic presidential candidate as all the monitors seek to block Bernie Sanders. Still no results from Guyana's general election. The Elections Commission says it hopes to receive all the returns by the end of the day. And thousands march across France against the government's attempts to force through its pension reform. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is from the South. Millions are voting across the United States on Super Tuesday in a Democratic presidential race that has slowly turned into a Bernie Sanders versus the rest contest. Voting is taking place in 14 states and the U.S. territory of Samoa. Sanders is seeking to cement his position as the frontrunner and fend off a challenge from former Vice President Joe Biden, who gained momentum following his recent victory in South Carolina. Despite endorsements from candidates who have dropped out, Biden still trails Sanders in the delegate count and national polls.
I definitely, when I first saw that Buttigieg dropped out, my thought is maybe that he's polling with Biden for maybe doing a VP and they're trying to pull votes. So it's interesting to see. I feel like going forward, Bernie's always kind of had a tough fight ahead of him, and if he gets that nomination, that'll be huge. And I feel like we're just gonna have to take it step by step. It's definitely an uphill battle.
Meanwhile, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and his wife have cast their ballot in Burlington for the Democratic Party's largest primaries. A total of 1,357 delegates are at stake, with one candidate needing almost 2,000 to win the nomination at the party convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin come July. So far, Sanders has built a strong momentum with his rivals, uniting to unseat him as the main frontrunner to challenge Donald Trump.
Number one, we are determined to defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of our country, a president who's a pathological liar, a president who is running a corrupt administration, and a president who is attempting to undermine American democracy.
So let's take a look at who's electing who in these Democratic primaries. So far, 4 U.S. states have held their primaries or caucuses: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, electing a total of 155 delegates to the Democratic Party convention in July. This Super Tuesday, 14 states are voting, plus the U.S. territory of Samoa and Democrats abroad, for a total of 1,357 delegates. The biggest are California and Texas, which contribute 415 and 228 delegates respectively. After Super Tuesday, there will still be 2,467 delegates to elect in the remaining states. We'll come back to the U.S. shortly, but first, Guyana's Elections Commission, GECOM, has called for patience, saying preliminary results will be released later on Tuesday, following the country's crucial polls. Ballot counting is continuing in the presence of election observers, with official results expected in 1 week. So far, 139 regional results have been processed out of more than 2,300, but it's too close to call. The South American country has held its general election in the midst of a big oil boom and a year after a no-confidence vote was passed against the ruling Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change coalition.
I will ask you to be very patient, and I will ask the members of the media who were really, they're very responsible. I notice you're very responsible at this point in time, to be a bit more patient with us. The results are trickling in and a process of verification is being conducted. I will leave that to the CEO. The CEO will address you. But what I would tell you, our elections were as promised. GECOM has delivered free, fair, and credible elections.
Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk is in Georgetown with more.
Well, there was this press briefing that Telesur broadcast live, in which the results were not there as everybody was expecting here. This room where we are sitting right now was packed with journalists, cameras, and diplomats, observer missions, and they were all, it seems, expecting to have the declaration that was promised yesterday. It didn't happen. Many reasons were explained in detail about administrative problems, logistical problems, weather, planes and boats going over rivers and the skies of Guyana that prevented this statement to happen. So sometime later in the day, they said, probably by the end of the day, there will be such a declaration in which a winner will be announced. But so far, all they said was results representing 139 polling stations of 2,339. This is not even in a country like Guyana, where the voting tradition is so attached to ethnic lines. It's impossible to draw a conclusion or a trend from this figure, because when you analyze past elections and in Indo-Guyanese regions or stations, what you find is like, let me put an example, a random example. At 125 for the PPP, the Progressive People's Party, and 20 to the APNU, the ruling coalition now in power. On the other side, if you come to an Afro-Guyanese area, the result is the opposite. So what you need is a national result in order to get an idea of who is winning, who won this election. So far, the explanations were so detailed that you couldn't really make up what really happened. On the other hand, we spoke to diplomats and observers, formally and informally, and they all said that the election was fine, fair, well organized, smooth, and the few incidents that were reported bear no importance in terms of the general outcome of the election. That's what they say. We're expecting new press conferences and briefings by observer missions later this afternoon and tomorrow. But all this, what really brings about is more tension in a society, in a country that was already charged with tension because of the delay by the government in holding these elections since December 2018, when it lost no confidence vote. And therefore, all parties are, many gossips are going around about election rigging, about fraud, about voters prevented to exercise their right to vote, and so on, for fake IDs, double identities and all that. Irregularities are usually, very common in elections, so far that they do not influence in great numbers the final result. That's for the observers to guarantee. So the situation remains calm. They say that if the result is unfavorable to the ruling coalition, there could be some turmoil. That remains to be seen. So we are going to be looking into the situation. There is a press conference later on, and a new briefing expected by the end of the day. Meanwhile, they promise to be updating their webpage, the GCOM webpage, constantly all along this afternoon.
And now let's go back to the United States with our correspondent Jorge Gestoso in Washington, D.C. Good afternoon, Jorge. Can you give us an update on how Super Tuesday has gone so far?
So far, so good. It's about an hour and 20 minutes for some polls to close. We're talking about the East Coast, and also California is 3 hours earlier, so we have to wait. So far, there is no complaints, no reports of any irregularities. Bernie Sanders is a favorite in California and Texas. He believes that are the key states to gain the largest number of delegates, and it's also what is anticipated that is going to be a fight for the minority communities. Most definitely, Bernie Sanders is seen as a person who definitely attracts and has the support of the Latino community, especially in California and Texas, and Joe Biden, the one who attracts the minority, like the Afro-Americans in the South. There are 7 states in the South that are going to be part of these primaries that eventually he could be doing well. But what is really taking place here is what Bernie Sanders has been repeating all along the day and all along the previous days. He said, the establishment is very, very nervous with our campaign, and is very nervous because the quote-unquote, the moderate wing represented mostly by Joe Biden and Mike Bloomberg want to become the candidate, even though so far Bernie Sanders has been organizing the largest movement and the most organized movement. It's the one that in this Super Tuesday, it has a presence in the 14 states, something that it doesn't have the movement of, or the organization of Joe Biden. In terms of the media, absolutely, after that big win of Joe Biden on Saturday, that definitely was doing extremely well in South Carolina, and the 2 previous candidates, we're talking about Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, were suspending their campaigns and give them the support to Joe Biden. The media, the only thing that is talking is that he is the person that is coming from behind, that is most definitely the most viable candidate to beat Donald Trump, and they put absolutely aside Bernie Sanders, trying to confirm the suspicion that most definitely they want to repeat the same thing that was happening in 2016, that they were definitely sabotaging his campaign to put Hillary Clinton. Well, Bernie Sanders has already said, and he did it today after voting in his Vermont state, he said it's the political establishment, the corporate establishment, the establishment within the Democratic Party that they want me out. Well, we are going to see at the end of the night if it's that campaign is going to be successful, or Bernie Sanders, regardless of the efforts to derail his campaign, is going to finish victorious of this key element, key day in that Democratic contest towards the nomination of the party.
Thank you, Jorge, for that important update. We'll get back to you throughout the day. Let's take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The Venezuelan government and opposition have held discussions ahead of legislative elections this year. Speaking following the talks, National Assembly President Luis Parra says he's committed to working towards a peaceful electoral process.
We told them that we want to end this confrontation that's polarizing the country. We want to work towards rebuilding our institutions and get back in line with Bolivarian Republic's constitutional laws. We have to create new agreements and not follow the path of destruction by lying to the people of Venezuela and destroying their hope. They are waiting for us to resolve the issues affecting our country through peace and fair elections.
One of the most important figures of the independence movement in Puerto Rico, Rafael Cancel Miranda, died on Monday at the age of 89. Cancel Miranda is the last survivor of the group of 4 independence fighters who took part in a gun attack inside the U.S. Congress on March 1st, 1954. The attack was designed to call international attention to the colonial situation of Puerto Rico and left 5 members of Congress hurt. Let's listen to a speech he gave back in 2019.
The United States wanted to sell us the idea that everything that came from them was the best. They tried to make us look as ungovernable. We can even teach them how to govern. I was in prison for 28 years in the US, and I know we can govern ourselves better than they can. Damn the day that they invaded us. It was our disgrace. Today, I'm not the 20-year-old man I was when the four of us did what we had to do in Washington. But I have the same spirit. I might not see very well due to my age, but my mind is perfect. If you want to be happy, dare to be yourselves and respect yourselves so you can fight for what you need to fight.
Bolivia's former president Evo Morales has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize by Argentine activist Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, who won the same award in 1980 for his activism against dictatorships in Latin America. Pérez Esquivel wrote to the Norwegian Nobel Prize Committee touting Evo for raising Bolivia's GDP, reducing unemployment and extreme poverty, increasing minimum wage, as well as improving access to water, telecommunications, and electricity across the country. Pérez Esquivel said, "I'm convinced that the Nobel Peace Prize for Evo Morales will be a fair recognition and an incentive in the struggle for inclusion, for the eradication of poverty, and for sustainable development." At least 13 people have been killed and 45 are missing as heavy rains hit the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo. The rains overnight caused landslides in the coastal cities of Guarujá, Santos, and São Vicente. Among the dead was a fireman who was buried as he tried unsuccessfully to save a mother and her baby son. The number of victims is being updated, and the fire service says there could be more landslides. Social organizations marched in Honduras to demand justice in the murder of environmentalist activist Berta Cáceres 4 years after. Families and supporters are demanding that the state prosecute the intellectual authors of the crime and not just the material authors. Cáceres led the fight to oppose the work of Company DESA for displacing the Lenca indigenous people from their ancestral territory and the contamination of their water.
This crime represents the plan to try to destroy the organized fight for land fight, which aims to build a new Honduras and which was led by Berta Cáceres. It seeks to create fear among activists.
South African trade unions have threatened to go on strike if the government fails to honor a wage agreement signed in 2018. According to the agreement, civil servants are supposed to receive a 7% wage increase effective 1st of April 2020. However, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has said the deal needs to be renegotiated. He argues that the deal goes against his plan to reduce the wage bill by $10 billion over the next 3 years. The unions, however, insist that they have no intention to reopen matters that were settled 2 years ago. Ethiopia has accused the United States of being undiplomatic in its interference in a row over a giant dam on the Nile River. This followed attempts by the U.S. to influence the outcome of talks between Ethiopia and Egypt on the construction of the dam proposed in 2011. The row stemmed from Cairo's concerns that the project might cause water shortages in Egypt. After offering to facilitate the talks, the U.S. recently issued a statement claiming an agreement has been made, which Ethiopia has dismissed as untrue.
The recent statement by the U.S. we believe is undiplomatic and does not reflect a great nation like this. We hope they will revise their statement.
In France, thousands of demonstrators have marched across the country against pension reforms and the use of the 49-3 motion by the government, which allows laws to be ratified without a vote. Unions and social movements called for protests after Prime Minister Edouard Philippe announced that the government would use a legal tool of the French Constitution, Article 49.3, to pass the controversial reforms after only 13 days of debates. The protesters say the government's decision is an attack on democracy and undermines the people's elected representatives.
This is a form of denial of democracy, since the members who submitted amendments who were working on the reform are elected representatives of the people. This is an issue of contempt for the French.
There have been scenes of chaos on the Greek island of Lesbos as police confronted migrants to block them from crossing to the mainland. Several migrants were injured as police barred their way and pushed them back. Other group of migrants who arrived on other parts of the island over the last few days have not been allowed to go to the main Moria camp and have been housed temporarily at the port. At the Turkish border with Greece, thousands of migrants have been left stranded after Greece suspended processing asylum requests. Almost 25,000 migrants are reported to be stuck on the border, and some opted to return to nearby Turkish villages. The Greek police are alleged to have shot and injured some who were trying to cross into Greece.
We were taken from the border crossing at Ipsala to here, but in Greece, the policemen fired at us. They wouldn't let us pass. Many were wounded. They are still there. We had nothing to eat, nothing to drink, so we had to turn back to the Turkish villages.
While touring the Greek-Turkish border with European Union officials, the Greek Prime Minister blamed Europe for failing to deal with the migrant crisis. However, earlier the EU had promised 700 million euros to Greece to deal with the migrant issue.
Europe has failed to find a common solution to this migration problem. Some closed their eyes and left the countries with external borders to deal alone with this crisis. Your presence here is the best proof that this is changing.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has claimed victory in Israel's general election, with exit polls putting him in a strong position to form the next government. The election, Israel's third in less than a year, was called after inconclusive votes in April, and September left Israel in a political deadlock. Surveys give Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party and its right-wing allies, including ultra-Orthodox parties, 60 seats, one short of a majority. Palestinian resistance movements say the victory of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party is a threat to regional peace. Palestine chief negotiator Saeb Ekerat said Netanyahu's threat to annex large parts of the occupied West Bank will only lead to more violence and chaos in the region. Netanyahu last week pledged to annex the Jordan Valley, a large part of the occupied West Bank, if he won and formed the next government. China is threatening to retaliate against U.S. bullying after Washington ordered 4 of the country's media outlets that operate in the United States to slash their staff by 40%. The Trump administration has insisted that the number of Chinese journalists be reduced from 160 to 100.
The U.S. is firmly entrenched in the Cold War mentality and ideological bias, from registering foreign agents to listing as foreign diplomatic groups to the so-called limit on personnel numbers that enacted the expulsion of Chinese media reporters stationed in the U.S. It has continuously escalated its oppressive actions against Chinese reporters, seriously interfering with the Chinese media's normal reporting activities in the U.S.
Argentina and Chile have both confirmed their first cases of COVID-19 in patients who recently returned abroad. A 43-year-old Argentinian man had returned from Italy, while a 33-year-old Chilean man had spent a month in Southeast Asia. Health Minister Ginés González Garcia said the Argentine patient has been in isolation since presenting himself to a private health clinic, and confirmed Argentina was prepared to tackle the virus. Chile's Health Minister Jaime Manalich said the Chilean patient had been taken to a hospital in the city of Talca. Meanwhile, Iran's health ministry has announced that 11 more people have died from the new coronavirus in one day, bringing the Islamic Republic's overall death toll to 77.
According to the latest figures, the number of new cases of virus infections is 835, and 11 people have died. The overall number of patients is 2,336, and the number of those who have died so far is 77.
The last patient has been discharged from an Ebola treatment center in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The patient, Masika Mawaso Semida, was the last patient to be admitted at the center located in Beni. The World Health Organization reported on Monday about the decline in Ebola cases, and Beni was noted as the only area left with a patient. The WHO said if 42 days pass without a new case being recorded, they will be able to declare an end to the epidemic.
Those who say that Ebola doesn't exist are wrong, because I've suffered from it.
Once this case is released, once they are cured, we can now count the 42 days before we can declare the end of the epidemic.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.